The help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Pei. We are continuing to look for the source that when it comes to Tumas Oicholin, the shiur is a kebetza and not the kezayis. We're going to have ultimately the statement of Rabbi Yechanan, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, that shiurin shel oinoshin or shiurim shel oinshin, right, the legal measurements of punishments as we are going, especially Rabbi Yechanan l'shitasai, Chatzi shiur is asim in HaTorah, no matter how little the amount. But shiurim shalai noshin is really halacha l'moisha misinai. We're going to be going back to the shiur of drinking when it comes to Yom Kippur. The Mishnah says the shiur is moloi lugmav. We're going to clarify that moloi lugmav, even though literally it means cheeks full, but it actually means the liquid that you need to fill up one cheek. And moloi lugmav is subjective to the person. The shiurim of kezayis in all areas of Torah. The shiurim of kebetza is objective. It doesn't matter how big or small you are. Whatever the din is connected to the kezayis, if you have the kezayis, let's say of God forbid of chaylev, you'll be chayiv chatos b'shoigig. Maloi lugmav is subjective. That means that the maloi lugmav of oig melech habashan will be many times more than the maloi lugmav of an average person. We're going to learn that the shiur of kedei achilas pras is not also, we don't proportion it according to how much food you need to eat for that violation. Whenever a achila has to be done within the time of kedei achilas pras, whether that's a kezayis or whether that's a kesevas hagasa, there are shiurim that abanan where something only takes into effect if you eat the amount of 2 eggs, as we'll see, the isur midarabanan, the tuma midarabanan, that if a person eats non-kosher food, they become tamei in order for them not to be allowed to eat truma and kachim. We're going to learn about the concept that liquids used to season food have a status of food. Also going to get to the shiurim of Yom Kippur. And very interesting dinim. Like for example, ho'echel achila gasa b'yom kippurim. Achila gasa means excessive consumption. Achila gasa means that if a person ate already, he's so full that if he eats more, he feels repulsed. That's not called eating. Certainly not b'negei punishments. He's actually being a mazik. And this concept is not unique to Yom Kippur. We're going to extend this to other areas in the Torah. Like for example, if a zar eats truma, but for the zar who's eating it, it's for him an excessive consumption, even though he's going to have to compensate the kohen from whom he took the truma, he won't have to pay him back the choimish, because it's not called an act of eating, it's called an act of damages. And if we'll have time, we'll go a little bit into Daf Pei Aleph. That's going to be going back to the last detail that we had in the opening Mishnah in Perek Shmini Yom Kippurim, and that is that oichel and mashkin are not mitzadef to the shiur. You can't eat a half of keseves and drink, let's say, a half of moloi lugmav and say, now you violated the inui. No, you did not, because it does not bring about the yishuv hadas and much more. We left off on Daf Pei 14 lines from the top of the Amid, quickly saying that the Gemara told us that the shiurim, kol ha-shiurim, kulam, whenever the Torah speaks about eating, right, the top line in the Amid, it's b'kezayis. The only exception, the Gemara says, is when it comes to the amount of oicholin needed to convey tuma, l'kula alma, there the shiur is a kebetza. And why is that? Because since the Torah changed the way it spoke about achila concerning tuma, mikol ha'oichel asher ye'achel in Parsha Shmini, there the pasuk is speaking about that if you have any one of the 8 shiratzim that died, if its carcass touched kol ha'oichel asher ye'achel, as long as that food was previously mukhshar l'kabel tuma, it becomes tamei, and then it can convey tuma. The asher ye'achel is extra. So we learn from over there, that's a shiur of a kezayis. And the question is, exactly how those words lend you to understand that we're speaking about a kebetza. The Torah was Mishana the Lashon, but maybe it refers to some other shiur. So Rabbo, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, said that oichel haba machmas oichel. Oichel asher yachel, oichel haba machmas oichel, food that comes on account of another food that comes from food. That's a chicken from a hen. And we had the back and forth. No, it's not the gedi from the mother goat, it's a chicken from the hen. The only question we had, that's where we left off yesterday, is based on the rule that tofasta meruba loy tofasta. Tofasta miu tofasta. Well, there are smaller kosher eggs or they're smaller eggs. Beitzas Tarnagolim is larger compared to the beitza of this tziporta. You're right, Danny. I just need more coffee. Correct. The egg from the hen. Well, make it the egg from a tziporta and make it smaller. And there's no answer to that. So in other words, Rababo, Omar Rabbi Lazar, he had no teretz. So Rababo didei Omar, 14 lines from the top. Same limud. It says, Mikol ha'oichel asher yei ochel, right, from any food that's eaten. What does that mean? The shinui lashon means oichel sha'ato oichle bebas achaz. It's referring to food that could be eaten in one swallow, in a single time. V'shiyaru chachamim that ein beis habliya machzik yoytzer mi beitzas tarnagoylos. And that's why they came to the shiur of Tumas Echolin kibeitzam. Omar Rabbi Lazar. So before we had Omar Rabbi Bo, Omar Rabbi Lazar, now we're going to continue to teach dinim said by Rabbi Lazar concerning shiurim. Omar Rabbi Lazar oichel chelav b'zman hazeh. If a person eats chelav b'shoigeg, b'zman hazeh means prior to the building of the third temple, and when Mashiach will come, we will have the opportunity to bring karbanos, even for the chatoim that we did b'zman hagolus, which is why during the times of Chazal, people would actually have a little booklet, and whenever they know that they did something for which the chayva chatas, they made a note of it. Mashiach will come, they'll take out the notebook and they'll bring that number of chatois. So says Rabbi Lazar that if a person eats chaylev, he shouldn't just write down, I ate chaylev, I'm chayiv chatas. He should write how much chaylev he ate. Shiur. Why does he have to write the shiur? Why does he have to write down the measure? Because Shema Yava Beis Din Acher, maybe when Mashiach will come, we're going to convene a Sanhedrin, and they will v'yarbe b'shiyurim. They will increase the shiurim. What does that mean? Why do I have to write down the amount? Clarifies the Gemara. My name is b'shiyurim. If Rabbi Lazar meant to say that the mechayve korban akazayis koten, guys, you remember that in Kalim there's a Mishnah that even when it speaks about a kazayis, we have a small kazayis, we have a average kazayis beinani, and we have a large kazayis. And the Mishnah writes that our tradition is that whenever we speak about a kazayis, it's kazayis beinanis, an average kazayis. Now what's going to happen if a person ate a small kazayis? They're not going to be chayiv chatas. So says Rabbi Lazar, write down you ate a small kazayis, because maybe the Sanhedrin will decide that that the shiur of a kazayis is on a kazayis cotton, and then for the act that a person did prior to that convention, even though that right now you're not chayiv to bring a korban, then the halacha will change. Says the Gemara, that cannot be the case. That cannot be the meaning of Rabbi Lazar, because ve'hotanya, when it says in Parshas Vayikra, Asher loy say oseno bishgaga ve'oshem, in the series of chatois, the Torah is speaking about Asher nasi yechta, and the Torah writes that if a person did something that should not have been done, but the person did it inadvertently, so taiches the braisa, what type of sin, what type of shoygeg is one for which Yechayev Achatos is only an act that Hashav Miyidiyasai, had the person known that what they're doing is prohibited, like the person is eating meat, they don't know it's chaylev. But if they would have been known, if they would have been told and they would have known that it's chaylev, they wouldn't have done it. That is the sin for which, since they didn't know that they're eating chaylev, then maybe korban al shiur. But what happens if a person knows that they're eating chaylev, but it's the kazayis cotton? It's a kazayis cotton. Or they don't know that it's chaylev, but they're only eating a kazayis cotton. And even if they would have been informed, oh, you're eating chaylev, they wouldn't have abstained from eating it as far as punishment is concerned, because now, if the Beis Din will change the shiurim, zol zayin, but right until now, unless you eat a kazayis beinanis, you're not going to be chayiv. You're not violating. Now again, there's a concept of chatzis shir osur midoiraisa, but we're speaking about violations that have with it penalties. There's no penalty for eating anything less than a kazayis cotton. So for such a type of sin, there's no carbon chatas at all. Lo yishav midiyasi, if a person would not abstain from their activity, even with more knowledge. Why? Because the eating kazayis cotton, ein mevi carbon al shkagasai. So the Gemara is saying that even if the Beis Din will change the shiurim after Mashiach will come, and they're going to say that a kazayis is actually lesser than the amount we think nowadays. So what? But that won't make retroactively that whoever had eaten prior to that change of the Sanhedrin, chaylev in a smaller amount, they're not going to be chayiv or carbon. Ella, what Rabbi Lazar meant was, Ella do lo mechayiv carbon ad the isa kazayis gadol. Tum fakir. If a person ate exactly a kazayis beinanis, so therefore they know that they're chayiv chatas, just as no Beis Hamikdash. So he would write in his booklet, when Mashiach comes, I have to bring a chatas. Says that Rabbi Lazar, don't just write, I'm chayiv chatas. Write what you did. Why? Because taka now, if a person eats a kazayis beinanis, to taka chayiv chatas. But when Mashiach will come, it could be that when the Sanhedrin will convene, they're going to say that a kazayis is a larger amount. It goes by a kazayis gadol. Then it's going to come out that this yid is not going to be chayiv. Even though when he ate it, it was the shiur currently of a chiyuv of a carbon. But if the Beis Din is going to make the shiurim larger, then he won't be chayiv anymore to bring a carbon. And it's good to know that, because if you're not chayiv to bring a carbon chatas and you do so, you're bringing chulan ba'azara. It's a terrible sin. Now, the Gemara just...
Is there a differentiation between a shahid if somebody had the ability to know that he's getting more than the didn't take the time to learn it, and someone who did what they thought was right, but in retrospect it was incorrect?
Yeah. So in the Bavis, I forgot exactly where, we really spoke about 5 levels. There's something called an oinus. Then there's something called a shoygeg hakarav le'oinus. Then you have a shoygeg, and then you have a shoygeg hakarav le'mezit, which is exactly what you're talking about, and this is not so pashit, but what you're saying is an important statement to be aware of. We're just brushing it over vaguely, but it could be and it should be broken down. Okay, back over here. Now, when we initially tried, when we understood that Rabbi Lazar meant, write it down, because they might make the shiurim smaller. The machayv carbon even for a kazayis cotton. Why did we even think? How did we even think this is what Rabbi Lazar meant when the words that Rabbi Lazar used was yarba b'shiurim? In other words, what do I mean yarba? If the havamina was that he meant that they might decide that a kazayis is a smaller amount, that's not called yarba. That's called memayet. So the Gemara says, no. There was a good havamina, because yarba b'shiyurim, the havamina was sherma yarba b'karbonos machma shiyurim. Mashiach might go ahead and make a kazayis defined as a kazayis cotton, if that will happen, that was the Sanhedrin. So then you're going to be chayiv more because of the new smaller shiur. The threshold, the point of violation becomes something that's easier to violate. Now, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, shiurim v'einashin halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Measurements and punishments halacha l'Moshe Sinai. The Gemara right away clarifies. No, einashin halacha l'Moshe Sinai by default, like the Rambam writes, is that which is not written in the Torah. Really, that which is not even properly alluded to in the Torah. No, einashin michtav chsivi. So the Gemara clarifies, Ella, this is what Rabbi Yechanan is saying. Shiurin shel einashin is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. In other words, what Rabbi Yechanan is really saying is that when Mashiach will come, the Sanhedrin will reconvene, they will not change the shiurim. When we learned in Masechtas Kelim that kazayis means kazayis beinani, that won't change. It won't change because it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And therefore, practically, if a person nowadays ate a kazayis beinani of chaylev, write in your book, yechayiv achatas. You don't have to write that detail. It's never going to change. Indeed, Tanya Nami Hachi, that shiurim shalei nashin halacha l'Moshe Sinai. I want to go some further. Rabbi Yechanan is not contradicting the whole amud. That how do you know that the shiur of tumas eichalin is bekebeitza mikol ha'oichal asher ye'echal? That can still be called a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, even though we just said that it should not even be hinted to in the Torah. There's different levels of hints and different levels of allusions. If something, many times you have rabbinic halachas. The Chazal bring a pasuk, it's called an asmachta. So the asmachta type of limud doesn't take it away from it being a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So Rabbi Yechanan would still appreciate, how do you know that tumas beitza is tumas oicholin is bika beitza? It's nice. It's a nice limud. It doesn't take away from the fact that still, ultimately, God gave that halacha, and therefore it will never change. However, that what Beis Din shall yavetz tiknun. Now, Chevra, we learned this in Tamura. Yavetz is, like Rashi reminds us, is Osniel ben Kenaz, who was amazing, because Osniel ben Kenaz was the Mamala Makam of Yehoshua. He was the first shofet after the passing of Yehoshua. He was alive in the times of Yehoshua, as we'll see in a moment, and he was the one that was misakein the shiurim. The Gemara says, how can that be? V'haksiv eila hamitzvahs. This is the last pasuk in B'chul Koisai, which is the last pasuk of Chumash Vayikra. And eila hamitzvahs means she'ein navi rishoi l'chadash davar mayata. That after God gave the Torah and the Nevi'im, right, cannot innovate anything. So how can you tell me that until the Yavetz we did not have the shiurim, but he made up? What did we have prior? That's a huge change. To only bring about shiurim at a later stage in history. So the Gemara says no. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and the Yidden knew the shiurim. And as we also learned that when Moshe Rabbeinu passed away, there were hundreds or thousands of halachas that were forgotten. And he was the one, the Yavetz, that Osniel ben Kenaz was the one that was able to figure it out through using the Yud Gimel Midos. Elashachachum v'chazru v'yasdum, and this mamish will make everything in the Amid fit. So yeah, there is Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'ochel is how Yavetz figured it out. But really, we knew that God told Moshe Rabbeinu, and coming back, and God told Moshe Rabbeinu not just the shiur of a Kazayas, but Kazayas Beinani. And therefore, it's never going to be changed. You know what else we're going to have soon? I think it's in the beginning of Megillah. These big things that we forgot. Menatzpach. That we have 5 letters that change in form when they are inserted at the end of the word. And we have the concept that it was something that God gave to Moshe Rabbeinu. We forgot it, and the same one, and he was the one that reinstituted it. We'll speak about this. How is that even possible? Did we not have a Sefer Torah? Didn't we have the letters written in the Sefer Torah, a Seif Mem and a Seif Nun? V'chulei, we'll speak about that when we come to Megillah. That's a good excuse. Let's go weiter. Hashoysim Eloi Lugmav. When the shiur of drinking, so eating, we said is a Koisevas Hagasa. And we had a machlokes yesterday, my friends, Rav Yehuda, Rav Zavid, is it larger than an egg or is it smaller than an egg? Now let's go to drinking. The taich of Meloi Lugmav means cheeks full. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, don't interpret it literally. Loi Meloi Lugmav mamish. It's not both cheeks full, which would be a leniency, because it would mean that lesser than that you didn't violate, it's lesser than it sounds. If you would move around the liquid to one side, to one cheek, and there's going to be a nice bulge. In other words, you have water that is in your mouth going around between both cheeks, but if you want to know the exact measure, the liquid that if you put everything to one side, it makes one bulge, that's the kimeloi lugmav. One second. The first challenge. The Mishnah writes, Miloi lugmav lashon rabim. So ema kim miloi lugmav. Add, it's as if there's a chafadimian. Like the cheeks full, it's really only one really cheekful. Meisvei, it says in a Braisa, again a kasha on this understanding of Shmuel. Kama yishta v'yechayev. The Braisa is speaking about Yom Kippur. So there's three way machlokes. Beishami amrim revi'is. Beisil aloimrim miloi lugmav. Same words in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, kim miloi lugmav. And the fourth, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira oimer kedei gemiya, enough liquid, right, for us to swallow normally, like we just learned before. Like kebetzas is what goes down your throat when you swallow. You can't swallow more than the size of an egg of a tarnagoyles. Kedei gemiya, same concept when it comes to liquids. What do we see over here? There's a machlokes. Amongst them we have Beisilo and we have Rabbi Yehuda oimer in the name of Rabbi Eliezer. B'chlal, the rule is that halacha kibeisilo, especially if it's Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, b'chlal, is connected to Shammai, or Rabbi Eliezer is Shamutehi. He was put into a chedim. So, and the only way to make sense of Beisilo being different than Rabbi Eliezer is by learning the words of Beisilo kipshutai. So l'chayret means, and our Mishnah is like Beisilo. We're passing like Beisilo, cheeks. So the Gemara says, no. Mi adifa mi masnisin, answers the Gemara. But you had a challenge against Shmuel from our Mishnah. But Shmuel got out of that challenge because the oikimna kidei sheira. It doesn't mean cheeks full. It means that if you put it in one side, you should see one side bulging. Hachinami, the meaning of Beis Hillel is kidei sheira. Now here we have a problem. Obviously, if this is what Beis Hillel meant, so how is he different than the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer? Ihachi hainu Rabbi Eliezer, answers the Gemara. There is still a difference. None of them hold that you have to fill up both cheeks full. Narvas then Meloi Lugmav Dachuk. So as Rashi says, according to Beis Hillel, you have to have his cheek very full. Only one cheek, very full. Rabbi Eliezer, who's more machmir, holds that even if it's not that very full, neither of them hold you have to have two cheeks that are full. But coming back, Beis Hillel, and our Mishnah Paschal is like Beis Hillel. Now here's the problem. The problem is like this, that if Beis Hillel would have meant both cheeks full is a larger shiur than the Revi'is, which is the shiur of Beis Shammai. And guys, don't forget, the smaller the shiur, the more machmir you are. Then it would fit the pattern that Beis Shammai is the machmir, Beis Hillel is the mekel. Now that we are saying that even though Beis Hillel uses the words cheeks full, he only really means one cheek full. If you put all the liquid in your mouth to one side, that is less than a revi'is. So it's going to come out that Beis Hillel is the machmir, even if you consume a lesser amount on Yom Kippur, your chayiv kares, for example. So fragt die Gemara, maskiv lo Rab Oishia, im kein, if Beis Hillel taka only meant one cheek, havalei mikulei Beis Shammai, umechumrei Beis Hillel, and we have in Mishnayos Eduyos a compilation of the few instances where Beis Hillel is the machmir. This case is not mentioned there. So doesn't that prove that it's both cheeks, which will make Beis Hillel the mekel? So Amar Lei that pei amid beis. No. That ki ichil, when they were debating in this Mishnah that we brought in this Braisa, all of the shitos, and Beis Hillel was the one, as was Rabbi Eliezer, as was the final Shita Kedei Gemiyah, they were asking, even when you have a very large person. And what's amazing is that when it comes to the shiur of HaKazayis, shiur of HaKabeitza, shiur of HaKiseves, it's uniform. It is not a subjective shiur. And the exception is the Meloi Lugmav shiur. Meloi Lugmav means the amount of liquid that fits into your cheek. And therefore, by a larger person, one Meloi Lugmav will be a lot larger than a Revi'is of Beis Shammai. Which, in other words, you can't say Beis Shammai is the machmir. Sometimes Beis Shammai will be the machmir. Sometimes Beis Hillel will be the machmir. Sometimes Beis Hillel will be the machmir. Sometimes Beis Shammai will be the machmir. It's not uniform. It's subjective. So that's why it's not mentioned in Eiduos. Because in a case where a person is very large, so according to Beis Shammai, if you only consume the Meloi Lugmav, a Revi'is, you're going to be chayev for breaking your inui. According to Beis Hillel, even though it's only one cheek, you're going to have to drink a lot more if your cheek is humongous. He just points out the following irony, that Maishna Achila, the Chol Chad V'Chad B'Kik Koiseves, here we don't differentiate and say that if you have a very large person, Oig Malach Habashan, you know when he's going to be taking away his affliction, when he eats a large amount. We don't say that. We say that again, it is uniform. No matter how large you are, if a person eats the amount of food, Kikoiseva Sagasa, they're no longer in a state of Inui. Maisha Shisia, the B'chol Chad V'Chad, Bididei. Why is it that we are making the drinking subjective? Says the Gemara, that's the Metzias. Amalei Abayim, Kim Luhu L'Rabbanan. That no matter how large you are, the moment you eat food in the amount of Bekekoi Seves, the Bahachi Miyasva Date, you will relieve your distress of being hungry. Batzir Mahachi, if you eat less than the Kekoi Seves, even if you are a midget, relative to your size, it's much more, doesn't matter. Loi Miyasva. That's the nature of food. And we're not saying that the Yishuv Hadas of Oig will be like mine. We're not saying that. Obviously, an average sized person will feel more Yishuv Hadas. Oig Malach Habashan will feel much less, but there'll be a certain amount of Uamariz. I'm not starving anymore. Masha'enkin, when it comes to drinking, that bididei, It has to do only when you consume the liquid that fits in your full cheek, then miyasvadaite. It's also about, putting your mind at ease. You're very thirsty. And ubedachavre loy miyasvadate. Azoidim etzias. Maskiv lo Rab Zeira. Again, he's not happy. The whole ha'olam kula bekekoy seves v'oig melach habashan bekekoy seves. So Amalei Abaya, yes, kim lohul rabbanan. The bahachim miyasvadaite. Batzim bahachim lo miyasvadaite. There is a uniform shiur, even though miu kula al matuva, everyone else, right, that wasn't distressed because of hunger, the moment they hit the shiur of a kekoy seves, they're really going to feel great. And oig melach habashan will only have a little bit of a relief of his distress. Yes, it's not that they'll have the same experience, but there'll be a uniformity in this putting your mind at ease. And everyone, when it comes to food in nature is different than liquid. An amazing concept. Liquid, it's subjective. Food is not subjective, it's uniform. Let's go to food. Again, you're telling me that it's always uniform? How do you make sense? Basar shamein, fatty meat, is the best type of food in the world. It's bikekoy seves. And lulali gefanim, if a person is never going to eat grapevine shoots, that's a new salad no one invented yet. Guys, we have to sell this over here. We should sell this. And today you can charge more than meat. Lulali gefanim. Is bikekoy seves? Again Abaya says, yes. Kim lul rabbanon, that bahachem miyasvadate. It's about the quantity, the volume of. The moment you hit the volume, it doesn't matter the food content, you're going to have yasvadate. If you don't hit the kekoy seves hagasa volume of food, no matter what the food is, it doesn't it's independent of the quality of the food. Even though, again, there is a difference. There is a difference within, do you have, that even when you have Yishuv Hadas, if you're going to have Basar Shamein, then you're going to have a tremendous amount of relief of your Inui. If you will Nebach only have Lulali Gefanim, then you will only have a little bit of a relief. But he's insisting that this concept of Inui versus Miyasvadate, it's uniform, it doesn't matter how big you are, it doesn't matter the content of the food, the quality of the food. Yes, it's Kekoy Seves Hagas. And the final pushback against it now won't go with the quality of the food, but it's going to be with another halacha that we have to always bring up. And that is like that. When we speak about eating, all of the, like shiurim, kazayis, what's that kazayis? Do you have to eat a kazayis in one time? God forbid to be chayv malchus for eating today? The answer is no. You have to eat a kazayis in the duration of time that it would take an average person to eat a half of loaf of bread. Now, how much is that in shiurim? So that's the big machlokes, whether a loaf of bread is 8 eggs or whether a loaf of bread is 6 eggs. Which would mean, accordingly, that pras, achilas pras means a piece, but it normally means really half. If a loaf of bread is comprised of the volume of 8 eggs, which is shitas Rashi, and we'll just stick with that shita, then just to know, then achilas pras is the time that it takes a person to eat 4 eggs of volume of bread. Achilas pras. Now, when it comes to all of the shiurim, kazayis, okay, let's again, kazayis chaylev. You're going to be chayev chatos if you ate the kazayis chaylev within kedei achilas pras. If a person really nibbled on it, we're not saying they did a good thing. According to Rabbi Yechanan, chatzi shir is aser min ha-Torah. They're not going to be punished. Whatever, if it's a korban, if it's malchus. So here we have another issue. The same concept of how can it be uniform? Benegeya, as we mentioned, a large person, a small person, better food, not such good food. The same question we're going to challenge, how can we have a uniform kedei achilas pras where there is an extreme of shiurim, and the extreme will be, the smallest of shiurim is a kazayis. Where do we have the largest shiur? Now the largest shiur, whether the koisevas hagasa, even according to Rav Yehuda that we learned yesterday, is bigger than a kibetza, but it's a little bit bigger than the egg of a hen. Larger than that is where Chazal made a takana, that if a person eats foods that are tamei. Now, if you remember, we learned this extensively in the end of the first Perek of Pesachim. Generally, let's say the food is on a level of a sheni. Foods can be on a level of a sheni. If I touch that food, I don't become tamei. Even if the food is on a level of a rishon, mido oiraisa, a rishon cannot be metama, not adam nor kalim. So that means if a person eats foods that are in a level of a rishon or of a sheni, they do not become tamei. However, in Yevamos we will learn that the Chachamim made a takana. This is a rabbinic rule, that if a person eats a half of a pras, which means a half of a half, according to Rashi, if a bread is 8, so a pras means the volume of 4 eggs. A half of achilas pras is the shiur of 2 eggs. 2 eggs. That's the biggest shiur. If a person eats food that is tamei, even if it's only on the level of a sheni, but they ate the amount of a half of the volume of 2 eggs, midrabanan, they become tamei, but they don't become tamei for everything. This is like the shmoina asar davar. They become tamei as far as truma and kachim is concerned. It's a rabbinic tumah. So here again, we were just pointing out the irony, and it's uniform. So you're telling me that the act of eating of a kazayis, for it to be considered eating, is it must be eaten b'toich kedei achilas pras. The act, this rabbinic rule that if you ate the 2 egg volume, we're going from a kazayis to 2 beitzim, same toich kedei achilas pras. Shouldn't we extend the time allocated? Because then it's going to be more, it's logical to make it proportional, but there is no such proportionality. Why not? How is it so? Maskav l'rava, kizayis b'chdei achilas pras. Oh, first he goes to Kaiseves. V'Kaiseves b'chdei achilas pras. Kaiseves is by Yom Kippur. Shouldn't we say that, figure out how much must you nibble every minute for you to hit a kizayis toich kedei achilas pras? And then apply it accordingly, proportionally by our Kaiseves. Why don't we do that? We don't do that. Again, Amalei Abaya Kimul Rabbanan. No, that the Yasvedate. Let's go to Yom Kippur. You want to have Yishuv Adas. You want to feel like, oh my God, I was hungry and now I'm relieved. I don't care if the shiur is now a Kaiseves. That Bitfei, if you eat food within the Zman of Achilas Pras, and we know from Yom Kippur how many different shitas and halacha, what that is. Let's say it's 4 minutes. Then you're going to feel relieved. If you eat betfei mahachem, even though it's a larger shiur, so you could have argued you should be given more time. No, you're not given more time. If you didn't hit the koiseves agasa, betoich zman kedei achilas pras, you will not feel relief. Loi meyasvadatom. And here we go. Maskav l'rava. This is the greatest extreme, and that's why we're going to be goyres. Not that he asked about a koiseves. We just spoke about the koiseves. We're going to go menakotza lakotza. The girsa is kizayis. What kizayis? B'chdei achilas pras. And on the other side, chatzi pras. A half of a half. A half of a half is the din that we just quoted from Eruvin. Slicha. We learned this in Eruvin. We just learned this. That a chatzi pras brings about tumas gevia midrabanan is also b'chdei achilas pras. At least over here, it's not about Yishuv Hadas, it's not about feeling relieved. We should give the person a larger amount of time. And still they should become Tamei Midrabanan, to be Metama Truman Kachim. So Amalei Rav Papa, no. This larger shiur is only a rabbinic. Tanach l'tumas gevia. Since the lav de'oiraisahi, so we can be a lot more lenient, which is exactly what we're doing. Because what we are saying is that if you ate it over an extended period of time, even though proportionally it's mamash like a kazayis b'tech achilas pras, you won't become tamei. Yes, by dinah derabanan, indeed, we are lenient. Says the Gemara, how can you tell me that this din that we just quoted from Eruvin, that if a person eats even sheni foods, that they become tamei, to be metamei truma and kachim? If you remember, there was a gzeira that you might have the food in your mouth, and truma does acquire shlishi, it becomes pasal. Kachim cannot become tamei to be metama, the 4th level, if you have sheni in your mouth. But Rav Papa is saying that it's only midrabanan. Rav Papa v'aksiv. No. Rav Papa connected it to a pasuk in the Torah in Parsha Shemini, where it says v'lo yisitamu v'hem v'nitmeisem bam. And v'amar Rav Papa mikan, that if you will consume food that is tamei, that's how we touch that pasuk, your body will become tamei. So the Gemara says no, even though he quoted the pasuk, it's really the Rabbanon, and Ubikra is a asmachta be'alma. It's what we call the biblical allusion. It's something that Chazal commonly attempted to do, many times very successfully. They leaned the Rabbanan on a pasuk, they connected it to a pasuk, but not every time we have in Chazal a shenemar doesn't mean that it is a midah eiraisa gavaldik. Okay. Going back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says this shiur of kikoisevas hagasa doesn't mean that you have to have on Yom Kippur meat kikoisevas hagasa. Anything that's called oichalin combines to make the shiur. That was the Mishnah. Every type of mashkin combines to make the shiur of kamaloi lugmav. And then the last statement in the Mishnah was, but oichlin and mashkin do not combine. So let's go. Kol oichalin combine. Every line is huge. Big chidushim here. Amar Rav Papa. What happens if on Yom Kippur achal umtza milcha? A person eats umtza meat with salt. Now guys, salt, just salt, is not called oichel. Even though many nutritionists now tell you that salt is the best thing in the world. Everything changes. When I was growing up, salt would give you a heart attack. I don't know, don't have salt. Now they're hacking to eat salt. Bottom line here is that if you have meat and salt, and together you have the kikoiseves, it is mitzdaref, it combines. Even though the lava chilahi, even though salt by itself is not called oichel. But since given the achli inshi, since people eat them together, so now it defines the classification of salt, and it's mitzdaref to the shiur, mitzdarefin. Another chiddush, Amar Reish Lakish, tzir shal gabe yarak, brine poured over dressing. Today, all of these, you want to be healthy, so you have salads. Then you put all that mayonnaise, mamach yatsa, scharav efseidai. So that's it, that guk combines mitzdaref likakesevas b'yom kippur. Now that, the Gemara says, that's very pshita. You know what, salt is less food. What's the novelty here? The Gemara gives, I'll tell you, a huge novelty, because these types of things that you put dressing, some of them are very liquidy. You would have thought it has a din of liquid. That's the word. So mao the tema mashkahu, and we learned in the Mishnah that oichlin and mashkin are not mitzdarev. So that is the big chiddush of Reish Lakish, that kol achshure uchla, anything used to prepare food, is classified as food, uchlahu. And now, if you need to make the kikoiseves adding the volume of the tzir, you do so. Next, Amar Reish Lakish, another chiddush. Ha'oichel achila gasa b'yom kippurim. Achila gasa in English is excessive consumption. Really, we learned to some psachim that there are two types. We quote a Tosfos, which is also over here. There are two levels of achila gasa. You have when a person is satisfied, they're satisfied. And if they add, okay, they didn't need it. They might not even have hana'ah, but they're not going to feel repulsed. That's not what we're talking about. Actually, the Korban Pesach many times was eaten that way, because since it should be eaten Kedei Sevilla, so we're not perfect. So we should eat it. It should bring us into the level of I'm satisfied. Sometimes people went beyond the satisfaction, but they didn't become repulsed. This achila gasa means when a person is very, very full. There comes a point where if you eat, not only does it not give you hana, it makes you feel terrible. It's damaging to you. It makes you experience repulsion. So if you do that on Yom Kippur, you're going to be patur from punishment. No one is saying you should do it. That's not called eating. No, what's the eating is you're removing yourself from inoi. This is actually being ma'ana you. My tama, because asher lo yisu'u naksiv. Again, it's not about not eating, it's about not being afflicted. And again, this not only does this not alleviate your affliction, prat la mazik. And by the way, mazik means on two levels. You're mazik, you're ruining the food and you're ruining your body. Or to put it in the right order, you're ruining your body and you're ruining the food. So now that we introduced this concept for Yom Kippur, now we will extend it to other areas as well. If a non-kohen eats truma, aside of his violation of eating truma, there's also a financial violation. And the Torah says that the person who ate the truma must compensate the kohen not only by paying him the value of that which he ate, but he must add a halachic fifth. That's only if he eats it. If a non-kohen damages, burns, destroys the truma of a kohen, he's like any other ganif. or Gazlan, he only has to compensate for the principal. There's no addition that has to be made. So the same thing over here. Zar she'achal truma achila gasa, he's only mishalem es hakeren, ve'eino mishalem es hachoimish. Why? Because in Parshas Emoid, when the Torah is speaking about this din that a zar that eats truma has to add a fifth, the Torah says ki yoichal. And we just established over here, and not a mazik. Eating achila gasa, you damage. Now you have to pay back, but you didn't eat. There is no additional penalty of adding the chaimish. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Zor daf pei aleph shekoiseis seoidim shel truma. Koiseis literally means to chew, and that's a word that's used when a person eats in any and every abnormal fashion. A achila shaloi kedarko is called koises, but let's use it even literal. If you have barley and it's mamish raw and it's not fresh, chewing it and eating it is not normal. If you did zar shekoises yoidim shel truma, also, since he's eating it in an abnormal fashion, mishalem es hakeren ve'eino mishalem es hachoimish, because it says again in Parshas Emoid ki yoichal, and again you're being mazik. You're being mazik the food, you're being mazik yourself. That's not the way you eat barley. Amar Rab Shizvei, Amar Rab Yechanan. Zor shebala shezifin shel truma. That's his example. Shezifin are plums. If you have a zor that didn't chew a plum, he swallowed a plum. So there's, first of all, is swallowing without chewing called eating? Lamay nafkamina, do you have to pay the chaimish or not? Chiddush number one is yes, it's called eating. And now, but it's going to tell you another part of the story that has another novelty. Vihikion, this zor, after swallowing a whole unchewed plum, he spit it up, he vomited it up, and then someone else ate it, right? He disgorged it, and someone else ate it. So Rishain, Mishalem, Keren, and Chaimish, Chiddush, that even though you didn't chew it, it's not called abnormal eating. It's called eating enough for you to be Chayv the Chaimish. On the other hand, you didn't chew it, so that which you spit up is not as disgusting as chewed up food that was vomited up. But once it was swallowed, and then it was brought back up, now it's not called oichel. Now it's not called oichel. Sheni ein mishalem elo demei eitzim l'rishain. So many nuances here. First of all, it's not called eating, so he doesn't have to pay the chaimish. How do you give value to it? The Torah says once something was swallowed by Reuven and it was spit up, it's to be used for fuel, for firewood, and that's how you evaluate it. The final nuance is, to whom does he pay it? Not to a kohen. You know why he doesn't pay to the kohen? Because the first chacham that swallowed this plum, whose chayiv keren and chaimish to the kohen, acquired it. I'm not talking about it. It didn't lose its status of truma. It's not food, but it belongs financially to the one that paid for it. So he has to pay demei eitzim l'rishain bilvad. All right, let's go weiter. We have time. Let's go until the Mishnah. The final din in the Mishnah was that food and drink do not combine. Ha'oichel v'hashoise ein mitztarfen. Says the Gemara, this is not uniform. There is a machlekes tanoim about the statement. And man taneh, who is the author? Amar Rab Chizda, takanat l'kula alma. The machlekes shenuyehi. It's one side of a machlekes, and which side is that? That will be Shitas Rebbe Yeshua. And what are we talking about? So we're going to quote second to last narrow line, a titnan of Me'ilah. Now, chavra, like this: when it comes to items that convey tumah, so as we know, there are two ways of classifying tumah. There are many differences in something that's tummy. Number one, let's say corpse, a human corpse, whenever it does convey tumah, the recipient of the corpse doesn't become tummy for 1 day, becomes tummy for 7 days. That's called a tumah that goes for 7 days. A sheretz from the Shmoyne Shiratzim conveys tumah, yeah, but the one who acquired tumah from the sheretz is only tummy for 1 day. You have other dinim. How much of the source is needed to convey tumah? There's also different shiurim. So, for example, by a corpse, we learned that a basar, a kezayis mipsar hameis, is metame, yashikoyach, a kezayis. You have how much of the sheretz do you need to be metame? Even only the amount of a adasha, remember, of a lentil. So listen to what the Rabbi Yeshua says, unlike the Chachamim, that kol shetumasay v'shiuray shaveh, only items that are the same, they are like, both in Tuma. Tuma means for how long. And not only for how long, but the amount needed to convey, it has to be alike in both. Then they are mitzvah. So for example, what happens if you have a half a kazayas basar from one corpse, a half a kazayas basar from another corpse? Only that, according to Rabbi Yeshua, combines, because they share the same rules, both in how long will the tumah go for and how much is needed b'chal to convey. But if they are not similar on both levels, if it's only tumasai v'loy shiurai, or only shiurai v'loy tumasai, certainly if it's on neither level, loy tumasai v'loy shiurai, only Rabbi Yeshua holds that a mitztarfin, and therefore, come back to our Mishnah, why would food and mashkin not combine for Yom Kippur? That's what the Rab Chizda is saying, because now that we established there's a kesevas hagas for oichlin, bigger than an egg, smaller than an egg, that's one shiur. By liquid, it's another shiur. It's the shiur of Malay Lugmav, only one shikful, Zol Zayin. But since they don't have the same shiurai, even though we're not speaking about Tuma, they don't combine. If not for Rabbi Yeshua, we would have combined them. However, Rav Nachman disagrees, and he says, no, even the Chachamim in Me'ilah would agree by Yom Kippur that we don't combine food and drink. Afilu temer Rabbanan, at kan loikomri Rabbanan Hassan, is dafka le'inyan Tumah. In other words, they are a lot more machmir. They allow for a combination to happen, even if there is less similarities, because at the end of the day, sheretz is called tuma. The Torah calls it tuma. A corpse is called tuma. Whatever the amount of tuma, whatever the length of time, whatever the shiur, it's called tuma. It has the same name. Its name combines it. Avol hacha, coming back, we keep on learning, we always come back to this. It's all about inui. And what was done for you to get relief from your inui. The Chachamim will hold, it's all about Yisuvei Daitahu. And Vahai meaning this guy that ate, let's say, a half of a kesevas of food, and consumed half of the liquid shiur of liquid, loy miyasvadate. So even the Chachamim will hold that it doesn't combine. And just like we have a machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rav Nachman, exactly the same we have between earlier Amirayim. V'chein, Amarei Shlakish, Rav Shlakish opined like Rav Chizda, that our Mishnah that does not allow us to combine oichlin and mashkin for the violation of Yom Kippur is really a machlokes tanoim. The machlokes shenuya. And our Mishnah is only following Rabbi Yeshua. And he quoted the same Mishnah Me'ilah, the Tanan, Klal Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Chuli is enough. However, Rabbi Yechanan, like later Rav Nachman, we're going backwards, he disagreed with that, like we just had above. Amar afilu temer Rabbanan, at kan loika amri Rabbanan Hassan, elo le'inyan tuma. Again, like he doesn't even speak it out, Rabbi Yechanan. But the word is that why do the Chachamim hold that they combine is because by the very fact that the Torah calls them both tamei, we use the same name, that in itself means that they share so much in common that the details are not a hindrance. They still combine. Avol hacheh, it's all about Yisuvei Daitahu. And Vahai, if someone ate half of a shiur of oichlin, or part of a shiur of oichlin, and a part of a shiur of mashkin, is loy kameyasvadate ubemele, everyone will hold that they do not combine. Chavra, we'll stop over here. Just to know, we're getting into relatively big dafim. I know there's only one more exception. But the good thing is that all the way at the end on Daf Peiches is only one Amid. So if we're going to start falling just a little bit behind that Amid Beis, we'll make it up all the way at the end, to be continued.